Heather, there is some big news here involving BYU. Get us up to speed.
So BYU and Coastal Carolina have agreed to play this Saturday because Liberty is unable to play Coastal Carolina because of COVID-19 outbreak within their program. So what this does is it gives BYU a much needed opportunity on its schedule. They had been trying to play somebody else. This gives them a top 25 opponent. But Zubin, if we're being honest here, I think what it does is give them an opportunity to catapult into the New Year's Six Bowl consideration. I still think that the Cougars would need a lot of help, a lot of chaos above them to be truly considered for the college football playoff. But as we sit here for 2 weeks now, the selection committee has not put them even within New Year's Six Bowl range, which is typically the top 12 spots. But this has a chance, if they win that game, to give them the boost that they need.
And Key, I would just mention right now BYU is at 13. Heather's talking about the 12 threshold. So you could imagine why a game to be played against an unbeaten team, no matter what conference they play in, would be important.
It would be, but it'd be interesting to see when these two teams started preparing for each other, because it could look like last night, NFL game, if you know what I mean. Heather, Michigan-Maryland game was obviously canceled. What does this mean for the Ohio State-Michigan game 2 weeks from now?
Well, it's obviously in jeopardy, and Michigan said that the earliest they could possibly return to practice would be Monday. So if Ohio State cannot play that game, that would put the Buckeyes below the 6 games needed to be eligible for the Big Ten Conference Championship game. So assuming they play against Michigan State this weekend, that means that they would be 5-0 heading into Champions Week, though. That December 18th, 19th weekend, guys, every team in the Big Ten is playing a game, even if you're not in the conference championship game. So Ohio State could be matched up against a respectable Iowa team, for example. They could punctuate their resume, finish 6-0 still, and be in contention for this thing, but they would not have the conference title as a tiebreaker that the selection committee uses when comparing similar teams.
Heather, speaking of Ohio State, Wisconsin AD Barry Alvarez told the Detroit News that the Big Ten could change the rules if Ohio State is not eligible for the Big Ten championship game. How likely is that to happen?
That's a difficult question to answer because all 14 athletic directors would have to agree with Barry. And while he is certainly an influential voice, not just within the Big Ten, but also college football as a whole, and a former selection committee member, he knows what it takes to finish in the top 4. I don't know if there's enough support, because they would have to do that. And remember, this decision was made in conjunction with head coaches and with input as well from the Big Ten championship administrators, for the people who run that game. So they can change it, they can, but they also, at the end of the day, have to answer a question: how far are you willing to go, essentially, to put Ohio State in contention for the college football playoff as a conference? You know, can they also find somebody, another team, to play against Ohio State if they can't play Michigan within the conference? Would anybody be willing to do that? I think behind the scenes, there's a willingness from the conference to be flexible. But again, this always has to go up the chain to the presidents and chancellors. And I just don't know, to be honest, if there's enough support at this moment for that.
If Ohio State doesn't play in the Big Ten championship game, Heather, but does play Wisconsin that weekend and get in Wisconsin 6 wins, how would the committee evaluate 6-0 season versus a 7-0 season that includes a Big Ten championship?
I think it's an entirely different conversation. If you have Ohio State, and let's remember, this is possible. They can play Michigan State, they can play Michigan, and we might just have the scenario everyone expected, which is Ohio State winning the Big Ten title. And if they were to beat a one-loss Northwestern team, win the Big Ten, I think they're almost, I hesitate to say them a lock, because you never know what's going to happen, but I think they've got a great chance if that happens. If they don't have that conference title and they're sitting there at 6-0, then it opens the door to what happens in the SEC and the ACC conference championship games. Are there 2 SEC teams? Does Florida beat Alabama? Are there 2 ACC teams? Does Clemson beat Notre Dame and they split during the season. And if that's a possibility, Ohio State could be on the outside looking in. And don't forget about Texas A&M. This week, before all of this hypothetical bubbled to the surface, they had serious talks in that room about putting Texas A&M at 4 and dropping Ohio State. So it's already a precarious position for the Buckeyes.
You mentioned the ACC. How are other conferences reacting to the ACC's decision to cancel the Clemson and Notre Dame's rescheduled games the week before the championship game that they're supposed to play?
I think that was another example of what we've seen essentially from the summer to this point, which is conferences have to make decisions during this pandemic that are best suited to them and their teams. And by doing that, well, first we know that obviously Notre Dame is a lock to play in the ACC championship game. Clemson can get there with a win against Virginia Tech this weekend, but what it does is gives them another layer of flexibility, because if by some chance Notre Dame and Clemson couldn't play those games on Saturday, they now have December 12th freed up to make up those games. And Miami's still in the mix, by the way. They need to play one more game because the ACC wants those 3 teams, Miami, Notre Dame, Clemson, to each have at least 9 games before they determine who will play in that championship game. But at the same time, now you have Notre Dame and Clemson, if all goes as planned, sitting there with bye weeks before they play each other, which if you're those 2 head coaches is quite the ideal situation.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus right now.